Welcome to this episode of Creation FAQs, where we ask some of the most frequently asked questions about creation. This is a series produced by the General Conference Public Campus Ministries, PCM. And here in the studio, I have three amazing people. First of all, Annalise.
Hi, Sven.
Thank you so much for coming in.
No worries.
And Raoul as well.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, likewise. And finally, definitely but not least, it's Harry.
Great to be here, Sven.
Yeah, good to have you here as well.
Thank you.
You know, we are looking at the topic which involves Antarctica, which is one of the most fascinating and beautiful places on Earth. You know, just think of the ice shelves that we see on TV.
And the penguins and the seals.
Penguins and seals.
They're cute.
Yeah, it's an amazing place, and I'd love to go there.
Definitely.
But it's interesting that there's scientists hard at work in Antarctica and also Greenland as well. And they're actually drilling in Antarctica. And they're not drilling necessarily just for oil, but they're drilling for ice cores. And I just wanted to know, have you guys ever heard of ice cores before?
Yeah, at uni, yeah.
Sounds vaguely familiar.
Okay.
I've heard a little bit about it, but not too much.
Yeah, it's interesting that we should, you know, if you're out on the streets, you might find that most people would say, well, I've never even really heard about ice cores. But when you go to creation and this topic of the age of the Earth and what's been happening on this planet, you find out it actually comes up quite a bit. And so that's what we want to talk about today. So what happens with these ice cores is that they actually drill down into the ice using this cylindrical drill, and they pull up this cylinder of ice, which is eventually is 3 kilometres long. They pull it up in different pieces.
A lot of ice, Sven.
It is a lot of ice, and they have to store it as well. They have to keep it cold, and they keep it really protected because they're really interested in what happens. Now, why would they be interested in these ice cores? Is because the ice cores represent literally thousands of years of history, they believe, going down into the ice.
Is that because there's layers that are found through those ice cores, Sven?
Yeah, what happens is every year that you're in Greenland or Antarctica, there's a huge dump of snow. And so you get the snow on the ground and it gets compacted down. And then the next year you get another layer of snow and it gets compacted down. And every year you get more and more snow. But as you dig down, you find that these layers go deeper and deeper into the ice, which is really, really fascinating. So they pull out this cylinder of ice and then they start counting these layers to try and work out how much history is in the ice itself. It's a fascinating process. And imagine you being there and you pull out this ice core and you think, wow, I could look at literally maybe hundreds of thousands of years of history. Wouldn't that be an amazing thing to do?
It would be great, but what about when you get really deep and the ice has been compacted so much that it's barely even distinguishable that it's a layer?
Yeah.
How are you then able to count what is a year? What's representing a year? Like, could it be that it's representing several, like one layer, or like how can you distinguish it?
Yes, that's a really good question, Annalise, because what happens is, think about this ice core, and it represents tons of ice, right? So the more ice you've got, it's weighing down all the layers beneath it. So exactly what you're saying, Annalise, the ones below get compacted down so much. So what the scientists do is that they say, well, let's measure other things in the ice, other properties of the ice, and that is what they call proxies. So they've got a number of different proxies, so they can measure the electrical conductivity of the ice. How much electricity can run through the ice is one way of doing it. They've got different isotopes of oxygen. They can measure that going down through the ice core as well. There's all these bubbles in the ice. Because it traps the air, and so they can measure the composition of those the air bubbles as well. And then would you believe it, if you have like a storm in a place like Africa or where there's a desert, or this dust gets blown all the way around the world and it lands on this ice, and you've got these layers of ice as well. And dust too.
Wow.
And then you've got these radioactive elements too. So they measure all of these things and they try to line them up to see how they can match them all together. And that's how they come up with this idea that these ice cores represent thousands of years of history. In fact, what they've done is that they've dug a core out of Greenland called the North Grip ice core, and they've calculated it's 120,000 years old. That's incredible, isn't it?
Well, that goes a bit different to, I guess, what we believe from the biblical account, doesn't it? How do we, I guess, bring those together? Is that possible?
Well, it gets even worse, shall I say, or more interesting, because they've drilled down into Antarctica, and they found an ice core which they believe is 800,000 years old. So that's like 8 times what the North Grip core was. And then just last month, I read that in August 2017, they've radiometrically dated some ice in an ice core from Antarctica, and using the potassium-argon radiometric dating method, and they calculated it was 2.7 million years old.
Wow.
How accurate are these dating methods? Is this a number that we should believe?
That is the question that we have to ask. And so we need to sort of step back and first of all, we need to go to these layers. Remember, you were asking about these layers in the ice cores. And you think about it, like every year you get a dump of snow, but do you only get snow in Antarctica in winter or at one time in a year? Do you only get one layer of snow, do you reckon?
I wouldn't say so. I'd say that it would change seasonally. You know, you might get a time of year when there's a lot of snow and then other times when there's not much.
Correct. And so the scientists have recognised that every time you get a snowstorm, you can actually get another layer of snow.
There you go.
Right?
Yeah.
So you can have multiple layers representing one particular year. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. Now, the other thing to keep in mind as well is that with these proxies, these properties of the ice, they try and match them up. So they try and correlate them together. But the challenge there is that they're actually making assumptions as you go down through the ice. Right?
Yeah.
How it changes and what's happening. And so if you make a systematic assumption all the way through those, the proxies and the measurements, what you'll find is at the end, you might get a number, but it actually doesn't represent the age of the ice.
So it's not that the ice is agreeing with itself, it's that the method is agreeing with itself.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So the ice itself would of course be in agreement because it's been laid down through the processes which it came into being. But the measurements, the methods which we calculate it have changed, and the assumptions, the calculations are based on the assumptions that we make. So of course the scientists are actually aware of this. And they want to check this out. They want to have some ways of kind of benchmarking these measurements. So one of the ways they do it is by using volcanic eruptions. So just like I said that you can have dust layers through it, you can actually have volcanoes which erupt and they send a layer of volcanic ash in the ice.
That's interesting.
So you can mark it, you can say, well, that was the time that this volcano erupted and there's the layer. But you have to know as well that we only have human records of volcanoes going back 2,000 years.
What about, could there have potentially been massive volcanism as a result of the Great Flood that happened? And could we potentially see that represented in ice cores?
Yes, and that is one of the keys. Yeah. That is the key for understanding the ice cores and what they actually represent. So first of all, the fact is after the flood, you could have had this incredible ice age.
Yes,
right?
Yeah.
And not only the ice age, during the flood, you could have had these volcanoes erupting all the way through. And so they are calculating that these volcanoes only erupt every 100 years or so based on the regularity or the rates of eruption that we have now. But if you go back in time, if they were erupting much more frequently during the flood, you find that all of those layers represent much shorter periods of time.
Just for our viewers who probably don't have a scientific background, how would a volcanic massive volcanism, how could that plunge us into an ice age? Because a lot of the time it seems as though ice ages are exclusive for evolutionists. Like you're a creationist, you can't believe in an ice age. So how do we reconcile that with our beliefs? How can we show to others that a volcano could have actually put us into an ice age, just so they can understand.
Yeah, well, that's a very interesting question. How could you have an ice age with all of this volcanism going on? Well, the reality is that you could have that because of this incredible dust, volcanic dust layer that spread around the Earth that would shield us from the sun.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it would also warm our seas and also
Right.
cause the land to become very, very cold because all the particles are blocking sunlight. And so it means that the seas are warm, they're evaporating, all this water is evaporating, it's going over the land, but the land's so cold that it does not come down as rain. It stays frozen, and so it falls down as snow.
Interesting.
That's my understanding and what is the explanation for ice ages. So that's just to explain how it could have come about from volcanism.
There's a famous ice core scientist called Richard Alley, and he said this: agreement amongst the proxies does not prove accuracy. However, perhaps all of us were being fooled in the same way. And that goes back to these assumptions. So if you're willing to accept that the flood really did happen, that ice ages could have occurred afterwards, then you can understand why these ice sheets and the ice cores actually are the age, which matches the Bible as well.
So just to check my understanding, you're saying that it's not a matter of whether there was this number of volcanic eruptions or not, or this number of ice layers. We're just talking about how quickly they were erupting and how much time was between them. We're saying there was much less time than the evolutionists would put between them, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So we're not denying that there's volcanic ash there.
Right.
We're not denying that there's layers and that the proxies are actually representing properties of the ice. The question that we're asking is the rate at which those layers are laid down, the rate at which the proxies represent actual annual time, and when those volcanoes occurred may not be according to the rates that we see occurring now or what we've measured and done through history.
Do you think volcanoes erupting would be associated with an event such as a worldwide flood?
They certainly could be. I mean, we'd have to really dig into the Bible and find more about that as well. But it's interesting that Ellen White says that Satan was actually scared for his life during the flood, and that's pretty incredible.
That's pretty
to believe.
intense.
So you're looking at pretty huge winds, snowstorms, volcanoes, the whole
water's bursting up through the ground as well,
Okay.
breaking everything up. It would have caused a lot of, geological instability.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I just want to finish off with a Bible text which actually points towards this ice age kind of conditions. It's found in Job chapter 38, verse 30. Would you be able to just share that with us here this afternoon?
Yeah, no problem. Job 38 verse 30 says the following: "The waters become hard like stone, and the face of the deep is frozen."
That's incredible.
Wow.
That's in Job. This has been a great discussion that we've had, and to recognise that the ice age and the ice cores can be included and incorporated in the Bible. Thanks for joining us for the discussion. We look forward to exploring more questions with you next time. See you later.